Hi, welcome to week 4. Last week there was a couple of efforts. I wanted to make sure it was clear what we were trying to do. I know we went out initially and found some data that you found interesting. Um, the thing about that data is it's just a starting point. So it is just meant to get you some field names and some values so that you can start to use your own ideas to update and to use that data effectively. So just wherever it came from and whatever it was about, it's not as important as what you want to do with it from now on. Another thing we want to make sure is if, for example, your data set had 100 things in it, it's not that hard to organize 100 things. But we want to try to conceive of a list that could be somewhat infinite. In fact, there could be millions of things. So we want to make sure that we're not already focusing on the value that this data has. Instead, we want to make it generic so that we or you add value as you go through the different exercises. So a lot of thoughts on that this week, also as well as I was able to find a better source for how to organize my perfume data. But as you go in and you look at the data more critically, you probably found a lot of fields that don't mean much of anything. So you'd hopefully deleted those. And if you wanted to or needed to, adding fields, such as to make it more universal or to even just make it at all interesting. Remember, we're at the very bottom rung. This data in itself is probably not that interesting. In fact, it might be describing something else that's interesting, for example. So you want to make sure those descriptive fields really work to get you to the next step. And so this week was about thinking about it, and last week was about thinking, this week is about doing it. So what we're going to do to add structure and meaning to our data is we're going to use HTML, hypertext markup language. There's a lot of reading, so just go through, make sure you understand a little bit about what we're trying to achieve, what do semantics mean, and I'd say there's some also good readings here, especially this one from Brad Frost, which is the idea of atomic design, where we design from small to large and we combine things in different ways. Really important. I wouldn't read the entire thing. It's probably something where you'd read the first couple pages so you get the idea of why we're using markup language. And I'll give you a quick tip, is the nice thing about HTML5 and the markup language that I want you to explore is it's just English words. They have a meaning to them. So for example, these are all brand new HTML5 tags, but they describe parts or areas. And I want you to think of these as ways to group your data into different sections and or a repeatable container. So I will show you markup to give you an idea of what I did. What I'd like in the assignment that's due this week is to mark up a few of your records into HTML. We're going to use a thing called JS Fiddle. There's a few tips here. You need to make sure to save things, and you also want to put some descriptors on the file itself, so if you keep changing it that you have like a version number or something, just so we make sure that you don't do some work and then it doesn't transfer through because it's another virtual space. That being said, we're also going to share and talk over things, so it'll be a iterative process as always. One thing that might not be clear in my example is I want you to take one record, one of your rows, and mark up the text using this particular syntax that you'll see, but just use the name of the column, just so I get a reference as to what you're marking up. And then you're going to translate those into HTML tags, which are the exercise here. So it's really this is much more of an art than it is a science. You're just trying to figure out what's the most meaningful way to group, to create hierarchy using headers, and to kind of make this data in a sense makes sense structurally within this particular language. It'll probably all make sense once you do it, and if it doesn't, there's some examples here to show you why, as well as a point where you can just discuss, is this helpful to you? I think most people by the end of this really start to understand how useful and actually how valuable it is to have this step rather than going straight into something visual. Anyway, so that's this week. As always, it's iterative, so contribute and I will give you feedback as we move along. Thanks.